Hello, and welcome to Jason Cavness Experience. I'm your host, Jason Cavness. Our guest today is Rachel Druckenmiller. Rachel, are you ready to be great today?
I'm ready.
Rachel is on a mission to ignite more resilient, intentional, and life-giving leadership through virtual and in-person keynotes of life learning experiences. With over a dozen years of experience, she is a nationally recognized thought leader in the field of workplace culture and well-being. She was named the #1 health promotion professional in the United States in 2015 by the Wellness Council of America and recognized as a 40 under 40 game changer by Workforce Magazine in 2019. Check out her daily videos on LinkedIn for daily inspiration, motivation, and insight to bring out the best in yourself and others. Thank you, Rachel, for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation.
So, Rachel, what are you focused on right now? What's keeping you busy?
Keeping me busy, a lot of things. It's funny, yesterday I did a little bit of math looking back to see how many presentations have I done since COVID started, and I've done 68 presentations since the middle of March.
Whoa, that's a lot of presentations.
It's a lot, but I guess there's a high need for resilience and being more human right now. So I feel like I'm in a good spot.
Why do you think so many people asking for your service? Just that all of a sudden had it just came to them, they needed help with this, or is it brought on by COVID, or what do you think the main reason is?
Yeah, it's a combination. I mean, in the HR community in particular, I had established myself, over the past few years of working with and speaking, at their events around things related to well-being. And when COVID hit, some of them reached out to me actually, and they were like, we cannot move forward with programming as usual. Our people are really freaking out and we need help and we need to give them hope and we need to give them some support to shift their mindset. Can you do that? And so that really, I kind of accidentally ended up where I did, but with years of experience kind of building up to this place. So I think that was, a lot of it is people just were realizing the need of, we cannot ignore this and our people need help and we have to do something to support and equip them to be able to make it through this season.
Is a certain type of company reaching out to? Like, is a certain industry, certain demographic, certain amount of revenue, or just all kinds?
I mean, all kinds. I find that I end up working a lot with professional services firms. So in the accounting, insurance, finance, engineering, scientific research space. So a lot of kind of professional services companies, all different sizes, and work with their leadership teams, speak at all hands meetings and keynotes. And it's really fun to kind of work. And of course, with HR professionals, it's really fun to kind of work with that variety of people and to bring these messages to places where they're not typically hearing them.
So how does it work? Suppose a company hires you on, but then you can quickly tell that they're just checking the block. They really don't care about learning or getting better. Just there to check the block. How does that work for you? You break the contract with them and tell them you're not for them, or how's that? What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty honest with people about look, I'm not a check the box kind of thing. If you want something to come in and just, I can do the one-off sessions, and I do those with some people that are like, look, we just need to do something to just breathe a little life into people right now. I can do that. I like doing that. But I find that if an organization says, hey, we're doing leadership training, we want to do one session, it's like, well, that's not going to change anything for the long run. So I just like to be honest with people and then let them make the decision of say, hey, look, this is the way I've seen it work best and most effectively. I can do this, but I don't think it's going to get you what you want. So I just try to be honest with people and say, look, if you really want somebody to do X, and you just want to do this version of it, here's somebody who might be able to help you. But if you really want to dig deeper, then here's how we would go about doing that. So, yeah.
So what do you do in this situation? Like you go to a company and the company owner says, we are the best company ever. Everything's great, and you talk to employees and they're telling you a different story.
Well, a lot of times when organizations are, recognized as a top workplace, for instance, so they really do value their culture. I've had those kind of organizations reach out over the past 5 months too, of saying, we really do value our people. And because we can't bring them together for in-person happy hours, or because we can't do all of the social things we used to do in person, we're looking for other things to do. So they're doing cooking demonstrations virtually, or they're doing virtual wine tastings, or they're doing Zumba classes, or they're doing, activities where they bring kids together. I'm finding that a lot of times, I don't necessarily get the direct access to the employees before I'm going in and doing something for them. So I will a lot of the times do a survey ahead of time to find out, all right, what are the key pain points of the people that are going to be in the room? And then ask them, hey, if you could take away one thing from this session, if you're going to spend an hour with me, if you're going to spend 90 minutes, out of your day doing this thing, what are you tangibly hoping to walk away from? And then I take that feedback and I incorporate it into what I do. So I may not talk to them directly, but I may be able to get some insight from talking to several people on the HR team or by doing surveys like that ahead of time to really get a pulse on what's going on.
Have you seen, what challenges have you seen, like people like, they're a manager, everyone's in the office and then anything's remote. What challenges have you seen owners or managers like switching from like in-person supervision to like remote supervision?
I've seen lots of interesting things. I read an article the other day. I forget where I saw it, but and I could find it, I'm sure. But I think people are going a couple different directions with this. I think some people are going to the micromanaging mode, where they're like, tell me what you did every hour of the day to day, because they don't know how to manage people who they can't see. And I think that's going to be really, really, really toxic, the organizations that go that route, because what it indicates is a lack of trust in their people. And so I think people are going to resent that and become bitter and be very likely to be looking for employment elsewhere, if that's the route the employer goes, if they're really in their business and they're micromanaging. What I find to be helpful is to give leaders tools and even phrasing to use to check in with their people. So for instance, something as simple as, how can I best support you right now? That phrase, asking a question like that, how can I best support you right now? Or, hey, you've been on my mind. I just want to check in and see how you're doing. Like, how are you doing at work? And then how are you doing outside of work? I really want to be here to support you as your leader, as a whole person. And that takes time to get to that point. Because if you're a leader who traditionally has not demonstrated that you care about the whole person, and then you suddenly show up and you're like, I care about you, you don't have that foundation of trust built up. And a lot of people are trying to do that right now. And so what I do is I like to use kind of metaphors for things, but in the book Dare to Lead, Brene Brown talks about relationships and trust building as like a jar of marbles, and how every time we have an experience with somebody that it's an affirmation, or it's a validation, or it's a connection, or it's a follow through, or it's asking for feedback and acting on it, each of those things puts a marble in the jar. But when we have something disruptive that happens, like when we feel like our employer is spying on us, for instance, and tracking our every move, that takes a big chunk of marbles out of the jar, and those are much harder to replace. So I like to encourage people to think of their relationships in their organization as like a jar of marbles, and to be very conscious of what are the little things that you're doing on a consistent basis to create these opportunities of connection and stacking these small moments of trust over time, so that when you do get to the point where people are in a tough spot, you have some marbles in the jar, and you can actually have some more of those conversations that might be a bit deeper than you were used to doing before, when you could just see each other all the time.
And in fairness, there are some employees who are not good remote workers, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's some employees, like for instance, if you got like 4 kids running around the house and you got like 2 dogs barking in the background, like that just might not be the right fit. So I don't think it's for everybody. And I think some people really do benefit from being in that space of being with other people. But I think what it's really going to cut back on, and I think this is good, is unnecessary travel. So for instance, we have to go see this client in person. We have to go take this, morning flight that's 3 hours and then take the red eye back. I think people are going to recognize, you know what? We could just have a phone call.
Just for a 30-minute meeting.
Right. So I think that'll be better for the bottom line, and also better for people's families, which I think is a big part of what's been affected right now. We're getting to know what I often call the soul behind the role. We're getting to see that people are not just their jobs, that even the people that you thought were super together in the office might be a little bit of a hot mess at home, and you're seeing their world behind them. We can't hide these things anymore. And because of that, I think it's particularly important for leaders to be compassionate toward their people, recognizing that everyone's doing the best they can, and everyone's got a different set of struggles and challenges that are making it difficult for them or easier for them to work in this new setup.
Yeah, and when we said like do remote work, we didn't say remote work plus part-time teacher plus part-time this plus that.
Yes, exactly. Well, even the phrasing, I heard it said the other day, I heard it a couple places, but even the phrase return to work is a misnomer. It's like, people are working.
Yeah, what do you think people are doing, right? They haven't been on vacation.
Right. And people actually, interesting thing, I'm finding that people are less apt to take vacation, because they're like, well, if they never worked from home before and they always had like their computer stayed in the office, for instance, when they left work, they pretty much left work. But now, if all of your work is pretty much in the room right next to you all the time, I think a lot of people, I'm finding from the work that I'm doing with managers and leaders and the feedback I'm getting and the surveys and stuff that I'm collecting from them, is that they're working more than ever, because they're like, well, I used to have a 2.5 hour commute, so now I'll just work 2.5 extra hours. And that's hard. And I think for HR in particular, it's important to be mindful of that, to really give people permission to take some time away, to disconnect, to turn off the notifications on their phone, and to have people hold them accountable and say, hey, you said you're on vacation, do not respond to this email.
That's a very good point. So define unmuted? What does that mean to you?
All right, so if we're kind of shifting into that, I think it's really actually connected to what we're talking about now. For me, being unmuted is using your voice to advocate for yourself, to ask for what you need and want, to speak up at work, to speak up in your relationships. And the reason why it matters so much to me is because I silenced myself, like a lot of us do. I silenced myself for a lot of my life, emotionally, whether it was dealing with some dysfunction in my parents' marriage as a kid, or loving to sing, but not being willing to be that vulnerable in front of people and sing publicly, or if it was, that my feelings were hurt by my peers because I felt excluded. I just buried a lot of that. And there's repercussions to doing that. And a lot of us do that, especially at work, and men and women do this, but women are probably a bit more apt to kind of suffer the negative consequences of it, in terms of it showing up as health issues, as depression, as even something like irritable bowel syndrome, which is not something we probably talk about typically on these conversations, but it can manifest if we don't speak up, if we silence ourselves. It's gonna show up in some other way in our lives or in our body, and we're gonna have to deal with it eventually. So I just find that to be unmuted is to really be fully and joyfully alive. And there's an energy that comes with that I think people are really missing. And I light up in the work that I do when I see people advocating for themselves and speaking up and asking for what they want and taking risks and going after big dreams. That kind of stuff just really, like, that really excites me.
So do you think a lot of people mute themselves because they're concerned, like, no, if I'm my true authentic self, people won't like me, or they just dismiss me, or it's just a lack of confidence in themselves?
I think it's all of those things. I think it's a lack of confidence. I think it's fear of being dismissed. I think it's a fear of rejection. I think it's a fear of judgment. I think it's a fear of embarrassment. It's like, oh, what if I do that thing and I totally bomb? I don't feel secure enough in myself to take that risk, and so I'm not going to. Which is how I felt about singing for a really long time. I was like, what if my voice breaks? What if I miss a note? Oh my goodness, people will think I'm a terrible singer, and then I will never sing again. So I'll just start by never singing. And I think we do this. And I think also in the HR profession, there's maybe a tendency to constantly push down all of our own needs because we're the people that are supposed to meet the needs of everybody else. And so you may end up in a position where you're frustrated that you're not valued, you're not appreciated, but maybe you haven't taken the time to communicate the value that you bring. Or maybe you haven't taken the time to ask for feedback on what you're doing well and what you could be doing better or differently. Maybe you haven't communicated that, hey, I've been a generalist for 7 years and I would like to move into an executive position. What's the growth path for that? So I think a lot of it is just taking those small steps over time that will help us get closer to where we want to be. But it takes courage, and it can feel risky and scary to do that.
So if someone's in an organization where they feel like they had to be muted, would you recommend they find another job, go somewhere else where they feel more open, or just like stick it out and work for themselves until they can feel they can be unmuted?
Well, considering that I was someone who was in that position, there's an assessment that I love. It's a tool that's used by a lot of people leaders, the predictive index. And it gives you it ranks you on 4 different variables on extroversion, on dominance, on extroversion, on formality, and on patience. And so you take the assessment and you get 2 graphs back, or 3 back. You get back one that reflects how you see yourself. You get another that reflects how you think other people expect you to show up. And then you get the composite, which is like those 2 blended together. And 5 or 6 years ago, I remember sitting down with our HR coach that worked for our organization. And I looked at my charts and I was like, these are 2 different people. Like, who I am is like, take charge, take the lead, extrovert. I want a lot of variety. I'm willing to kind of flex on the formality piece. And who I thought everyone expected me to be was can you just do what we ask you to do? Can you just go along with the process? Can you just do what we ask? And I was like, well, no, I'm naturally a challenger. I'm naturally somebody who is constructively disruptive, as my friend Brian Passon says, and how I question things. I'm very curious and I want to understand why things are, and I'm okay doing something that hasn't been done before if I, in my soul and my being and my core, believe that it's right. And so, you know, that's been an interesting experience of getting unmuted. And so it took me, that was 6 years ago. So I didn't go out on my own and start my own business until last year. So I sat with that knowledge for 5 years before I decided to make a move. And, you know, all things considered, what I would suggest for people to do is to get more honest with yourself, and to get feedback from other people about when they've seen you at your best. When they've seen you at your best, what did they see come out? And then to really do some reflecting yourself and recognize, all right, how might I spend more of my time doing that stuff that really lights me up? And get very granular. I used to have a list that I kept at my job that I would use in my conversations with my boss for, you know, when we had compensation questions and that kind of stuff. And I had a list of my highest payoff activities. So the things that the things that I did were that only I could do at that level, that I was uniquely positioned, skilled, qualified, and equipped to do. And then I had a list of other things that were basically were referred to my boss as, he referred to them as energy vampires. So I was like, what are the things that suck the life out of you? And I made a list of those things too. It's kind of like a to-do and a not-to-do list. And so I looked at those things that were all the things that basically suck the life out of me. And I said, how can I delegate these? And so that way I could spend more time. And I told him, I said, look, if you're having me spend my time on list B, you are overpaying me. But if you had me spend my time on list A, you are getting a really good deal. And so part of this, we have such a fear that if we advocate for ourselves, we're going to get fired or that something terrible is going to happen. And that never was the case for me. It was so few people do that. But if you're at a place where they're not letting you do the things you want to do, and you've tried and you've made effort and you've gotten feedback about what you could be doing differently, and you've done the self-awareness work and you have changed your approach to accommodate their ask, and they're still not budging, look for another job. Like, life is too short to be miserable in the work that you're doing.
I totally agree. And nowadays, like back in the past, you got to stay at a job 10, 50, 20 years. Nowadays, you can change the job every year. Every 2 years, no one's going to really say anything anymore, I don't think.
It's true. And, you know, actually, it's funny you say that, because I remember I was at an HR conference about 3 or 4 years ago. And the question was like, make a list of some of your biggest dreams and goals for your life. Like, what are you most looking forward to in the future? So I'm like, write a best-selling book and like do a TED talk. And like, you know, I have all these big things that I want to do. And I remember the instructor, there were like 150 people in the room. And the person who was facilitating the session called on somebody in the front row. And I'll never forget, they raised their hand and they said, retirement. And I just remember thinking, what have we done to work? That it is so miserable for people that the thing they're looking to most in their entire life is basically not working, like not really doing anything. What have we done to work?
Retirement is actually a pretty new concept, isn't it? Like, people didn't work in the 1800s and retire, right? Like, that's pretty new.
Yeah, in other cultures too. People don't stop. I mean, in other cultures, people they keep working, and people who live the longest, like some of the people, you know, some of the traits of people that live a really long time, they worked until they were like 85 years old. Yeah, they didn't retire.
They still have a purpose.
That's exactly what it is. It connects us to purpose. So
is it safe to presume that if you're an introvert, you're more likely to meet yourself?
That's a really great question. So I considered myself, and this is usually surprising to people, I considered myself an introvert. I was classic on Myers-Briggs, which I don't know, I think that's marginally helpful. There's been a lot of people, like including Adam Grant, who have called out why it's not effective or valid. But when I took the assessment growing up, I showed up as an ISTJ, which is like, you know, very like introverted, sensing, thinking, judging kind of person, very someone who is in their own head. And I am literally the opposite of that, with the change of one letter now as an adult. And I really think it was, I didn't feel safe to be who I really was for so much of my life, that it wasn't until I truly felt accepted and seen, which didn't happen until about 3 years ago, after I burned out and bottomed out and had to suddenly start being honest with people in a way I never was before, that I realized, oh my gosh, you actually weren't introverted, Rachel. You were just silencing yourself because you didn't feel comfortable in who you were. So I don't think that's like the case for everybody. I think some, like my husband's an introvert, you know, but I also think that labels aren't particularly helpful either. There's a book I'm reading called Personality Isn't Permanent. And I think that's really helpful for people to think about, is like labels are very limiting. And so if we say, oh, well, I'm an introvert, so I don't speak up, that's a cop out. It's a cop out. Introverts speak up and so do extroverts. And so I would invite people and maybe even challenge people to think about what are the limiters that you use on yourself? What are the labels that you place on yourself that are potentially doing more harm than good? Like, I'm not someone who asks for what I want, or I'm not somebody who sings in front of people. And now I'm like, you know, on LinkedIn singing videos to thousands of people I don't even know. And it's fun for me. So part of it is really challenging those beliefs you have about yourself that are limiting, and really wondering and imagining what could happen if you flip those on their, you know, flip them on their head and say, well, what if that's not true of me? And to really not let yourself be so defined by these boxes. That's what I would invite people to do.
I think a big one people do too, and we'll talk about this later on in our talk. I'm not a good public speaker. I think so many people do that, right?
Sure. Yeah, they're like, I can't do that. Like, I don't speak in, do you know, I avoided debate classes. I avoided speaking classes. I avoided choir. I avoided anything that would require me to stand in front of a group of people and open my mouth and let anything out, basically. And now I get paid to speak.
That's great. So Rachel, how does empathy make someone a better leader?
Well, you know, I think that's one of the qualities we need to unmute in leadership, frankly, because the old guard basically said command and control. So I need to keep everybody in line so they follow instructions and do as I say. And if that happens, we will have order and avoid chaos. That's the old way of thinking, because people don't operate that way, and we're not robots working in a factory. I mean, you may be working if you're, you know, in manufacturing, you may have employees that are in a factory, but generally speaking, that concept of I need to command and control people in order to get things done, it's just not based in reality anymore. It's more, for me, I reframe command and control to connect and care. So how can we shift from being people who are focusing on, if I just get them to listen, if I just show them how smart I am, if I just assert my power, that's just going to make people not like you. So one of the things that I think this starts with, part of empathy, is self-awareness. And I think a lot of leaders, it's kind of like driving. If you ask most people if they're a good driver, they're like, I'm a great driver. It's like if you ask most people if they're self-aware, they're like, I'm very self-aware, which most people are not either. So, you know, empathy really, I think, starts with that level of self-awareness, of taking a moment and stepping back and being humble enough, which is another trait that I think is underappreciated in humans in general, but especially in leaders, is to have the humility to ask for feedback about, hey, what am I doing that's really working here? Is there anything I'm doing that is driving people nuts? It'll take you time for people to be honest with you about that if you've never asked these questions before. And is there anything that maybe I could be doing better than what I'm doing right now? Anything I could be doing differently to be more effective? So I think it starts with really understanding how you're being perceived in the first place. And then, you know, from there, getting clear on, okay, when you notice your temper flaring, how can you, part of empathy is self-regulation. How can I make sure that when I have those moments where I just want to bite someone's head off, that I take a step back and then I pause, maybe I get curious and say, maybe they're not doing that just to tick me off. Maybe there's something else that I don't know about that's going on. So let me get curious and find out and ask, hey, this thing happened and here's the impact that it had. And I just want to check in with you and, you know, and to see if, you know, what might be going on that I might not be aware of, because I don't want to make any assumptions about why that happened. So much of it from the empathy perspective is really getting curious. It's about being self-aware. And it's also about making sure that when we're talking with people, that we're truly present, undistracted. Like I look down, so I'm like phones away. Like when we're present with people, phones away, and really making sure they feel heard. So like mirroring back to them what you heard them say. So what I heard you say was you're feeling really frustrated about trying to figure out how to work from home and homeschool your kids at the same time. Did I get that? Most leaders never do something as simple as that, of just make someone feel heard and then validate their experience. It's like, it makes sense that you'd be feeling really frustrated. I can't imagine what that must be like. What can we do to best support you right now? It's like, those are the steps. Those are some, there's entire books on empathy and emotional intelligence, but those are a couple steps, I think, starting off that people can take, to really make sure that we're being present for people, that we're curious, and that we're not making assumptions about them, and that we're more aware of our own behavior and how that's affecting other people.
Yeah, I think a lot of managers get wrong too. Is like, if you just let your people vent to you once in a while, that solves most of the problems, right? They just want to be heard.
Yeah, and that's part of it, is they want to be heard, but then it's also like, how do we get out of that cycle of saying, okay, so what do you think we should do about that? Like, so part of it is recognizing and making them feel heard. It's like, thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate you opening up. So again, recognizing what they did, acknowledging the fact that they opened up to you, say, hey, I really appreciate you coming to me with that. And I would love to figure out something that we could, come up with to make this work. Do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to schedule a time later? Because maybe you just needed to get that off your chest, which is fine. But if you want to kind of do some possibility mapping, is another way of saying problem solving. If you want to kind of map out some possibilities for how we might approach this, let me know. I'd be happy to schedule time to do that with you, because I really want to support you to get to a better place with this.
Rachel, from your perspective, what you're seeing out there, what are people in general getting wrong about culture?
A lot of things. That I think that there's this perception that culture is ping pong tables and on-site workout classes, happy hours,
unlimited beer,
and rock climbing walls. It's absurd, right? Those are what are called climate, and climate are the things we see on the surface. So if you're imagining a stream bed and you see the forest around it, right? Climate is like the rocks and the trees and the root and like the trunks of the tree and the branches and the frogs hopping around. That's climate. What we really are more interested in is culture, which is the set of experiences, values, and beliefs that guide an organization. And I think what's happening right now, in particular, with what's going on with all the shifts as a result of the pandemic, is that people are recognizing, gosh, if we're not physically together in that cool office space, how do we really make sure we support people and maintain and sustain our culture? So I'm having more conversations now with organizations and their teams, and we're doing facilitated, like breakout groups, and giving people the opportunity to actually crowdsource solutions for this. So even asking something as simple as, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we, around the topic of connection? So, hey, what's something cool that we could do to foster connection and community within our organization right now? And put people in small groups, give them the chance to talk about that, and have them come back together and share their ideas. Like, there's going to be a good idea in there. And so I find that it's so, for me, part of the unmuting process now is shifting from unmuting myself to helping other people get unmuted. And that's one of the ways I love to do it, is bringing together groups of people where you get to leverage the collective wisdom of the people that work for your company, and to pull out of them some of their ideas, because there are genius ideas within your own people. And I really help to facilitate the process to allow that genius to emerge, and then to allow them to solve their own problems and to come up with their own possibilities to the challenges they're facing. And I find that that's very life-giving, and it is 100% passable and really effective in a virtual environment too.
So Rachel, tell me if you agree or disagree with this, and why. There's no such thing as good or bad culture, only the culture that's best for your company.
I would disagree with that. I think, because in terms of bad culture, when I think of bad culture, I think of toxic workplaces. And there can be a culture that is, I would deem bad because it's toxic, but I don't believe that they're irreparable. Like, I have kind of an optimistic realism that by asking the right questions, again, asking generative questions that really help people move from fixing problems, which is where most people spend their time in organizations, to imagining possibilities. When we create that shift in language and in focus, how do we move away from fixing problems to imagining what's possible, to bringing out the best, to saying, hey, even though we don't have the greatest culture right now, like if they're thinking this through, when have we been at our best? When are things working? And how can we build upon those things? So I don't think inherently that at their core, there's necessarily, bad cultures that are completely irreparable. I believe that, well, one, if you're led by like a totally narcissistic person who has zero self-awareness or desire to change, you need to get out of that job, because that person's not going to change. They're just going to continue to frustrate you, and you're going to be continually resentful and bitter, and it'll probably affect your mental, emotional, and physical health and well-being. In those cases, I'd say get out. But if it's really a matter of like, you have good people, but there's just been some things that have happened. Maybe previous leaders were toxic and you never did any damage control. Now there's some like cultural PTSD stuff going on. I think that the people in the organization, I think so many organizations miss this, that the people that work there can do so much of the solution creation if they are given the opportunity to do so, and if they see that the feedback they give and the ideas they share are actually implemented. That is what gives people hope. And they say, oh my goodness, I unmuted myself, I spoke up, I asked for something, I contributed an idea, and then I saw them do something with it. That is what so rarely happens. And like a lot of organizations. And so I think first and foremost, like really taking that time to get curious and to determine, all right, what do we have that is good here for an organization that's struggling? What do we have that's good? How can we build on that? And how do we want to move forward? How do we want to redefine what our values are and what matters to us? And how do we want to contribute to co-creating the future of our culture instead of staying stuck and believing that what we have right now is the best it's going to be?
So Rachel, I think we've all been in places where there's like one toxic person in the organization. Should the organization try to make that person better or get rid of them? Like how long should you try to like work on improving a toxic person before you say, okay, this is not working, we're going to move on from this person?
Well, I know Gary Vaynerchuk, has very strong opinions about that, or he's like, get rid of the bad apples. Like, it's just not worth it. The damage and the toll that it takes when you have somebody who's really, really toxic at your company. And the bummer is that a lot of times these people are top performers in the sense that they generate a lot of revenue maybe, or they're like your top sales associate, but they're a total jerk. And you lose as a leader, you lose credibility and trust when you knowingly let something continue in your organization that is harming the health and well-being and productivity and connectedness and relationships of your people, because that will have an effect on your client experience as well. If there's somebody that's really just a jerk to work with, someone's going to be frustrated with that person one day, and it's going to come out on a client experience, and people don't realize that that has a ripple effect like that. So, I would say those people are often bullies, and people are not typically honest with them. So I had a conversation with a law firm the other day. They had this person who was just like a very kind of misogynistic, sexist person. And he was kind of like I don't want to call him underling, but he wasn't like a partner, let's say. And he was getting tasked to do stuff that he thought he was above it. And so he naturally gave to the female associates at the organization to do, this is not uncommon, to give to the female associates of the organization to do. And in the midst of doing that, like there was a conversation that had to be had of like, hey, so here's the expectations if you're going to work here. These are the tasks and responsibilities for you to do. And without even referencing this other person, saying the things that, this person was giving to them to do, and say, so these are your responsibilities. If you want to, we would love for you to stay here. If you want to stay here, these are the things that you are tasked to do. Kind of like, are we clear on that? And so a lot of times people just aren't having conversations with those people. Like, so if you have someone that's being really toxic, to really, pull them aside and be very clear about the expectations for behavior here. And most people are so conflict avoidant that they won't do that. And then they will allow the toxic person to continue to cause, kind of a mess in the organization. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
I guess a lot of times, like organization, like someone's not performing or whatever, and the boss will say, Jason's not doing right, he's not doing well, he needs to improve. And someone will say, well, are you going to tell him? Well, he knows he's not doing well. Well, if he knows he's not doing well, do you think he will improve? Like, maybe he doesn't know he's not doing well. Like, people just, I never got that, right?
Yeah, I don't get it either. And they don't have conversation because, again, it's a bully. They're expecting no one to challenge them. And so they're just going to keep going by and doing what they want to do, because people are letting them. It's like we create the condition for the bullying to persist. And then we're like, why is the bullying happening? Because you're not doing it. You're not standing up to the bully.
You're enabling them. You're being enabled.
Right.
So Rachel, change the subject a little bit. You're involved in an organization called Hacking HR. Can you talk about that and why you got involved with Hacking HR?
Hacking HR is a global organization that is really focused on rethinking and reimagining the HR profession. And my friend Enrique Rubio started it, and we started our Baltimore chapter 2 years ago. And we're actually planning our upcoming events. We had a little bit of a hiatus. I was a pretty bad injury in the midst of COVID happening due to a car accident. And so I was kind of off the grid on any extra things for a few months, but we have something coming up. And so there's a lot of, online events that are being scheduled. There's a global summit that is incredible. There's like 500 speakers. I'll be one of the speakers. I was one of the speakers this past year. And you can go to hackinghr.io. And so you can find a chapter in your city. Again, it's global. So no matter where someone's listening to this from, they're very likely to find a chapter near them that they can get involved with. And because so many chapters are doing virtual events now, you could even potentially kind of sit in on events at other chapters if you want, and there might be like a small fee to pay. And they also just launched a podcast, Hacking HR Podcast. And in addition to that, there's other programs. So if you're an HR leader who kind of wants to, grow into the next level of what you're doing, they have a program called Grow. That's an application program. There's lots of really incredible programs. And so many resources. It's a phenomenal community, and it has like absolutely exploded. And Enrique's work and everything he does is exceptional. So I would encourage people to connect with him too on LinkedIn as well. But it's a great community to really be part of having a different conversation around what the future of human resources can look like.
So Rachel, when I heard the word hack or hacking, I think about tech and startups. Is this like a HR based on tech and startups, or?
Well, there is some part of the hacking HR is that we're looking at, what are some, how can we redesign? How can we, like you would in design thinking, right? Like, how can we redesign? How can we reimagine what this looks like? And we've done like hackathons. We've had events, like we did one about a year ago around well-being. And so, we had a couple different groups that were traveling around with each other that would go to a station and work on kind of imagining ideas around that topic, whether it was mental health or finances or physical health and well-being, which is not super relevant now, but like the actual space itself. There was somebody there from an architectural firm that was kind of talking about the space design to support well-being. So we've done events that are hackathons, but also just the whole premise behind it is like, really, how can we disrupt and reimagine and just recreate and co-create a new and exciting future of HR beyond handbooks and just being the compliance police.
And Enrique, does he still do like a monthly pitch competition with Hacking HR? I know he do like a monthly pitch competition for like HR companies, right?
Oh, he may be. I can't keep up with him. He does so many awesome things. I was just on his podcast. Yeah, he's great though.
He does do a lot. So I'm here, right? Like Hacking HR, y'all trying to be like new HR, right? Versus the old HR.
Yeah, it's like the new wave of HR. It's like, hey, if everything that's been done before, if you want like to have a new conversation about stuff, people are actually like really gonna implement, some changes and are really excited about doing it in a new progressive way and about bringing in people from other industries and other, other spaces to speak into this, whether it's people that come in from marketing or people that come in from design. Or from just a variety. So many industries are represented in those conversations that it's just a really great way to get exposed to, really, first of all, very interesting people, and just new ways of thinking about how to get excited about kind of the next season of what your career in HR might look like.
So Rachel, next let's talk about the National Speakers Association, which I believe you're a member of.
Yes, I'm a member of the NSA. I really got into speaking. Oh, I don't know. I did my first paid speaking gig in probably 2010 and got paid $75, which I was like, sweet. I spoke at my alma mater, which is a small liberal arts school outside of Baltimore. And, I would not have considered myself a speaker. I was asked to come back to speak to actually an HR master's class at my alma mater for the grad students there. And they had a unit, one session each semester on worksite wellness. And I was maybe 2 to 3 years into the profession as it was. and a client of ours taught the class. And so she said, will you come in and do this? And if I look back, I mean, my PowerPoints were terrible. I don't even like use PowerPoint that much anymore. I really know my content. And so it's more like a experience where people feel like they're actually, you know, talking to someone, or like a keynote type style, as opposed to like, you know, me reading off screens. But it's how I had to start. You know, I started that way. And then once I really hooked on to the things I was passionate about speaking about. So some of those were kind of just changes in my own health journey, starting about 10 years ago, 2000, yeah, or maybe about 7 or 8 years ago. I started speaking about some things I was discovering about how to totally shift my health and get rid of some, you know, health problems like acid reflux I used to have. And then 5 years ago is when I did my first talk at a SHRM event, a regional SHRM event, and I was co-presenting with somebody, and it went really well. And someone afterwards says like, that was really great. Do you do this a lot? And I was like, no, this is like my first time doing this here. And, you know, after that, I just discovered I loved it. Oh my gosh, I get such a rush. I was with a group of like 300 people for a benefits consultant and their clients and prospects and employees today. So fun. Like I love it. And for me, I've spent a lot of work really getting to understand the art and science of it. So there's a book called Steal the Show by a guy named Michael Port, P-O-R-T, who was one of my instructors at a school I went to called Heroic Public Speaking. So I did that starting in 2018. And I almost didn't do it. I mean, it was a big investment of time and money. And I already was realizing that it was probably my time was coming when I was going to be leaving my organization. And my parents are both entrepreneurs, so it's kind of like I was following in their footsteps. And I said, I'm going to try this. I'm going to go for it. And I learned everything. I learned from improv coaches and vocal coaches and writing and performance coaches. And that was when I started singing also in my talks as well. And, you know, it's reps. I have now done hundreds of presentations. You know, I've done free presentations. I've done paid presentations. I've traveled across the country to speak. I've done a lot where I live, and I've, you know, done almost 70 virtual now since COVID. And it's just like getting in the reps and really focusing on not how do I pad my ego. That's where people trip up when it comes to speaking. How can I be in service to my audience? What do they most need from me right now? Do they need hope? Do they need to be uplifted? Do they need joy? Do they need perspective? You know, are they struggling with their mindset and they need tools? What do they need? And so before I do any presentation, I'm very much focused on how am I serving the people that are giving me the opportunity to be with them and to share my stories and to share the things I've learned. And I find that has been something that has really shifted things for me, that don't be so focused on being a perfectly polished speaker. The way we speak now is a lot of times the way that I do presentations, just very candidly. And people find it so refreshing that it's not like a shtick. Like, don't be a shtick, you know? You have your own thing about you that makes you interesting, and play off of that. Let that be the thing that you lead with. And just really, if you want to be a speaker, get in as many reps as you can, and don't worry about whether you're getting paid. I mean, it's going to take time, but be committed. It is a craft. And I've put, oh goodness, thousands of hours into it, truly, in terms of preparation and delivery and rehearsal and learning and coaching. And, you know, I want to keep getting better. I don't think I've arrived, and I love it. So I'd say you really got to love it. Don't force yourself into it if you don't love it. And find something that you're really passionate about speaking about, and start with that, and get in as many reps as you can, and ask for feedback. Yeah. Does
the size of the crowd you're talking to change the way you prepare for it, or is the same preparation method each time, regardless of how many people you're talking to?
The size does matter. The audience matters. So for instance, I sometimes prepare more for a group of 20 executives. I prepare differently than I would for a group of 300 people where you feel like it's perhaps lower stakes. But I bring my fullness in terms of energy and in terms of insight and in terms of really knowing who I'm talking to. I have a very similar process for everything I do. Like, I really make sure I know who I'm talking to. I make sure I know the terminology that they use. I make sure I understand what their pain points are. And I make sure that I come with like this level of energy, because emotions are contagious. And I find that no matter what the group is, whether they're a group of engineers or accountants or analysts or HR professionals or a group of women's leadership team, that everybody wants to be part of an experience that breathes life into them. And so behind everything that I do is really that goal. How can I infuse energy and life and perspective and hope into whoever I'm with right now? And how can I equip them? How can I not just give them a bunch of quotes to put on a wall, but how can I give them practical, actionable tools that when they leave me, they say, oh my goodness, I have something I can immediately put in place. And that's what I find gets me, that's why people bring me back for stuff, because they're like, well, we bring you in because of your energy. We really like your energy, but we really like you to keep coming back. Like they like me to keep coming back because people walk away and they're like, oh my gosh, like, thank you for giving me something I can actually use.
Rachel, so let's say you're going to give an hour talk. How many hours will you spend preparing for that hour talk?
Oh, it depends. I mean, it depends on if it's new content. It depends. I mean, I've spent hours preparing for an 8-minute talk. So to me, it really depends on, how high stakes is it? Am I going to be in front of 100 potential clients? Is this a group I'm already very familiar with and I already have a certain level of credibility built in? So much of it depends on the audience and how connected we are before I get on stage or get behind my computer screen. And I'd say, the preparation varies. I did a 3-week leadership training series for a group of 80 leaders where they were broken up into 3 different groups. So I did 3 90-minute sessions a day, once a week for 3 weeks. And my goodness, on top of the 3 full days essentially of training, I probably put, in terms of time, easily a week and a half hours wise, like probably 60, a good solid 60 hours into prepping for all of that in terms of getting to know the client, researching their business, preparing my content, preparing my questions, the discussion questions, putting together evaluations and reports. It's a lot. Like I very much I'm very intentional about what I do when I'm working with organizations, because I don't want them to feel like it's canned, and I don't want them to feel like I just did the same thing for somebody else the day before. I really want them to feel like, wow, she knows us. She cares enough about us to get to know us. And that's going to trickle down into how we then, connect with and interact with our people. So I'm trying to model the type of behavior that I want them to put in place, which for me, that's really rooted in being very intentional.
So Rachel, like, when can you tell you're going to knock out the park? Like, can you, before you give the speech, you're on stage, you feel the energy, like, you're going to knock it out of the park? Or is this something you really don't know until after you've done the speech?
I can tell in the moment, like, it's much easier online because you have chat. So for instance, like 2 weeks ago, I did a keynote session with a group of legal administrators, which when you think of the law profession, people don't always naturally stereotype that as like the most energetic and dynamic and vibrant industry. Fairly or not, that's how most people characterize it, right? It's kind of, very introverted and quiet and whatever. This group was on fire. So first of all, they were chapter leaders from all the association chapters across the United States. And so they have had some interactions with each other. They typically would come together in person at this conference once a year and really get to see each other and catch up and connect. So part of it is if a group already has a certain level of cohesion, when I come in, like I like, it's like lighting a match, and it just, it sets it off. So for me, when I'm with a big group, like when I'm with, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, like I feed off of all of that energy. And I'm very intentional about having interaction in the chat, for instance, asking them questions, reading the things they're saying their names as I'm reading it. And I find that and I sing too in these sessions as well, which is kind of fun. And I just find that people are so excited about something that is not a canned PowerPoint with 50 words on a slide where the person is like face and hole in the corner, that they're so into it because it is so different than what they're used to, particularly with virtual experiences. So I just love to kind of like get people to rethink what's possible in these spaces, and that, hey, just because it's behind a computer doesn't mean it has to suck. And I like to just say that. I like to actually show people, hey, bring me in to do something, and I will show you that this does not have to be a stale and dry and boring presentation. It can be an interactive and active and engaging and dynamic learning experience.
Rachel, when you see people pull out their cell phones when you're talking, do you see it as A, them ignoring you and you know, they're somewhere else? Do you see it as B, that they're sharing what you're doing on social media, like tweeting it out and sharing on Instagram?
Well, it's funny. One of the comments I've gotten from my sessions is, I didn't see anyone looking at their cell phones. So one of the pieces of feedback I get is that people like aren't looking at their phones, which to me is a testament to their attention. I've had multiple people say that. They'll say, no, but people usually leave early. Nobody walked out of the room early. Like what? It's like, what are you doing to us? They're like, well, I'm connecting to your heart and your head, and that's making you feel engaged. But I generally don't get to, I try to focus more on the people that are really in it. And there's always those people in a room. It's different virtually because you can't see people's reactions. But when you're in person with people, there's certain people that like are very expressive, and they're more likely to laugh at things and show it. They're more likely to be smiling and nodding or giving you nonverbal feedback. I just spend my time connecting more with those people. I try to make eye contact with as many people as I can, but I really invest my energy in the people that are already giving me that energy back. So it's like a two-way exchange instead of getting caught up and worrying about why someone's looking at their phone. Like maybe they have a parent who's in the hospital. Like, I don't know. So I would much rather assume they're doing that because that's what they feel like they need to do right now. It's not a knock on me. And if it is, okay, so maybe I can't make everybody happy, but I'm going to focus on the ones that I can. So that's how I would approach that.
Rachel, on I believe July 7th, you did an article on LinkedIn about the four traits of resilient people.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so since I feel like that's kind of like connecting a lot of these dots together. So when I think about the 4 traits of resilient people, and this is coming from somebody who, as I mentioned, I've sort of alluded to it in the conversation, but I burned out and got mono 3 years ago, and recovered from that as a result of overwork and pushing myself too hard, which never happens to HR professionals. And then COVID hit and all my business disappeared because I was at the time, 100% live speaker. And then in a matter of 2 weeks, I pivoted and flipped everything to be virtual. And as I said, I've had 70 presentations. So that worked out well. But just as I had gotten to the place where I was feeling good about my transition with my business, I was out running with my husband the first weekend of May and got hit by a car and ended up with a compression fracture in my back. And so I had been speaking to organizations and their people about being resilient for 6 weeks, every week before that happened. And so I had a lot of my own medicine to take. And the first part of that is really accepting what is. So much of our pain and suffering comes from resisting what is. So instead of saying, man, I wish COVID never happened, I'm so mad it happened. Okay, I am too. And it is our reality. That's our current reality in this moment. It will not be this way forever. But if I accept what it is, then I can choose how I want to respond to it differently instead of just continually being angry about how it is. Another thing that I encourage people to do is to reset your mindset. And I have different tools that, we can certainly share with people. That article, I link out to different videos that I put together around like breathing exercises that help you get your thinking brain back online, because when you're in a state of stress or anxiety or frustration or fear, the thinking part of your brain, the problem solving, the creative part of the brain shuts down. And you cannot really make thoughtful, intelligent decisions and have intelligent conversations when you're in that mode. And so I give people a breathing technique, for instance, for how to get back in their body, which helps them reconnect to their brain, which helps them then get to a better place with their responsiveness. So, resetting mindset is part, focusing on bright spots, what I call bright spots, looking for the good things that happen over the course of your day, tracking small wins, any victories, even if something is seemingly insignificant, as I saw a beautiful flower on a walk today, tracking those bright spots in your day, making sure, I know another part of it was around don't hesitate, initiate. So like ask for help. One of the things that resilient people do is they recognize their own limitations and they're willing to ask for the support and the help that they need when they're struggling with something. And that was something that I had to burn out before I realized that. And so I've learned now to ask for help, to not see that me asking for help is me being a burden. It is me being human. It is you being human to ask for help. So just making a list, or making a list. What are some of the things that you could really use support on right now? And what are the names of a couple people that you could reach out to that might be able to help you with those things?
Rachel, why do you think we're so like unwilling to ask for help? Like, we're always driven us to give value, but we need help. We really ask for help. Why do you think that is?
I think, for a lot of people, it's that we get our value and our identity from being useful. And if we're not being useful, we're like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing here. And so I think, especially in helping professions, there's a tendency to overly focus on my identity as a result of my usefulness, as opposed to, my usefulness comes out of who I am. And so I think a lot of it is tied to self-esteem issues. I think it's tied to self-worth issues, or a lack thereof. I think a lot of people maybe haven't been affirmed by others, or haven't necessarily taken the time to affirm themselves. And I think all of those things really affect how we see ourselves. So I personally think that's a really big part of it, is we just don't, it's a fear of judgment, it's an insecurity, and it's also pride. I want to be seen as somebody who can handle all things all the time. So if I can't handle all things all the time, I'm not impressive, I'm not useful, I'm not needed. And then if I'm not needed, it's like, well, why am I here? And so it ties back to identity.
So Rachel, you've done a good job on LinkedIn doing articles. I believe you've written 54 articles. How has doing LinkedIn articles helped improve your brand?
For me, it's a matter, I don't think it's any one thing. I think it's consistency. So I started writing articles 5 years ago. I don't write them with any consistency yet. I plan to have, a certain, plan that, like, every Tuesday, for instance, or every Wednesday, I'm going to post one. So I'm working toward that. I think with LinkedIn, it's about posting regular content that's useful to people. So the shift I've made is like videos. I mean, I've done, I don't know, at this point this year, I've done over 100 videos on LinkedIn that are intended to uplift and inspire people. They're intended to help people shift mindset. They're intended to help them be better communicators at work and at home, to be more confident in who they are, and to connect to the strengths that they bring. So I try to be my goal in being on that platform is really to connect with people. I have gotten some business out of it, of people finding out about me because they started following my videos, for instance. But it's a way to establish yourself as a thought leader. And so I've been using it more to kind of build up, some momentum. It's a place, it's like my online diary, almost like my online vlog and blog, more or less, of putting these posts on there every day with the goal of just sharing common experiences that I'm having. Stories about getting unmuted, stories about resilience, stories about my own backstory and how I came to be, and some of the challenges I faced. And people are just really hungry for genuine people talking about things in very honest and transparent ways, with a bit of joy or a bit of humor or a bit of life to it. And that's what I feel like I do on there. And that's why I think I have, more and more people that are wanting to follow the work that I do.
So Rachel, do you sing in all your videos?
I don't sing in all my videos. I sing in some of them.
Not all of them?
No, just the one today I did. What's that?
Every video I saw, you were singing in it.
Yeah, I sang on today's Elton John. My voice is a little fried because I've been talking most of the day. I had a keynote this morning. But so I do those whenever I feel so inspired in the moment. So I've done, It Is Well with My Soul, which was like right in the thick of COVID, or, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, or This Little Light of Mine, or Hakuna Matata. I do lots of different, whatever I feel moved in the moment, that's kind of what I end up doing. So
Rachel, talk about your company in more detail, like how the idea for your company came about, where's that right now, what's your vision for it in the future?
Well, it came about because, I've always had a model for my family, my parents, of working for myself. They're entrepreneurs, they run their own businesses, and I always wanted to do that. I knew I wanted to do that. And so it was really a matter of time. So I, became a health coach 8 years ago. I went back to school and got my graduate degree in health science. I studied a lot in the wellness industry. And so I got, got to be a thought leader in that space, in the well-being space. And I went, as I mentioned, going through that speaking training and some several trainings around workplace culture. And I just got to the point where I realized, you know what, the thing I love the most is speaking. And that's just what I want to do full time. I don't want to do any of this other stuff. I want to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, with whom I want to do it, right? The way that I want to do it. And I don't really want to have any restrictions. I want to get to decide. I want to call the shots, basically. And the way that you do that is you work for yourself. And so I got to the point where it was, I started there, as my dad says, it was a size 8 shoe and I had a size 5 foot, right? And then I filled the shoe. And by the time I left, I was like a size 13 foot and a size 8 shoe. And I had to go, and it wasn't, you know, it was a good organization. I still do some work with them, actually. I have very good relationships still with many of the people I worked with. And it was just a matter of, I'd outgrown it. And if I wanted to expand to the level I wanted to get to with what I'm doing now, I had to take the risk, and I had to be willing to bet on myself and all the work that I had done to build my network and to build my skill set and to demonstrate my value. And I just got to the point where I said, you know what, it's time to do it. And I was actually excited. By the time that came, I wasn't running from that job. I was running to Unmuted. And that just excited me. And so it's, you know, I do keynotes, so virtually and in person. I do keynotes, I do workshops, I do leadership trainings around building resilience, around being a more compassionate and empathetic leader, around being appreciative, around being more human and intentional. So I find that I'm often brought in to bring and breathe life into teams, into organizations, into associations, you know, whether I'm speaking at an all hands meeting or at an association conference or an industry conference. I just absolutely love getting to use my voice to share these messages and to be in a position to facilitate the unmuting of other voices, to allow for that kind of collective co-creation of what is possible regardless of the topic moving forward. So it's so much, I love what I do. I have so much fun doing this, and I absolutely love it.
Rachel, so do you have like a marketing plan, or is all this like word of mouth and organically that you get all these great customers and great clients?
So far, it's been very organic. Gigs are generative. If you do a good job, people will tell people about it. If you do an exceptional job, people will tell a lot of people about it. And so for the most part, I often have people saying to me, hey, today I got an email from a group I did something with, and they said, we think what you're doing is exceptional. That was outstanding. Whatever we can do to help and support you, let us know. So when people say stuff like that, guess what I do? I follow up with them and I say, so you mentioned this, let's have a conversation. So I'm not afraid to have conversations. I'm not afraid to reach out to people. I'm, reaching out to certain SHRM chapters. So I have like an assistant who's helping me and communicating some of the sessions I'm doing around resilience, because it's very timely, to different HR chapters, SHRM chapters around the country. And so that is a little bit of like outreach marketing. I have a newsletter that I send out to people that has podcast episodes that I'm on, or articles I've written, or other resources and tools I think would be helpful to them. And, that sometimes will be one of the things that generates it, or, doing free speaking gigs at certain places that have people in the audience that have money to spend on learning and development, or on employee engagement, or on workplace culture initiatives. And then a lot of times I'm either referred in somewhere, or people are reaching out to me and saying, hey, somebody that you spoke at last year told me that you were really great. We want to talk to you about speaking to our group this year. So I feel very blessed and very grateful, but I'm telling you, you put in the work and you do a like excellent job, like over promise and over deliver. If that is consistently what's happening, people are going to bring you back in. People are looking for light and life these days, and for something that is refreshing and different. And that is what I feel like I consistently bring to what I do. And if you keep bringing value over and over again, people are going to market you for yourself, honestly. So that's where I am right now. I'm figuring out some things, because I do want to keep expanding what I'm doing to an even bigger level. But for right now, for year one, it's been very organic and word of mouth.
So Rachel, let's say there's someone out there that want to start a business, but they're scared of the risk. What advice would you have for this person?
I mean, I'd be clear on why you want to do it. Like the question I like to really ask people, I sort of mentioned a second ago, is, what are you running? Are you running from something, or are you running towards something? Because if you just hate your job, I have to get out of here, I just need to start my own business. It's not super glamorous. I mean, I'm generating invoices, I'm putting together contracts, I'm doing some outreach and follow through with people, I'm doing the research for my work, I'm creating all the content, I'm delivering all the content. Sometimes I'm up until 10:30 at night doing stuff, 11 o'clock at night. So I think the appeal of people have to recognize, and I know Elena said this, Elena Valentine's friend of mine, I know she said this in the conversation you had with her, that it's like not all glamorous. Like you've got to be willing to like suck it up.
Part, a lot of it's unsexy.
A lot of it's unsexy. You got to be willing to do the really or you got to figure out a way to delegate that to somebody who can handle that. Like I'm having a conversation tomorrow with somebody that I'm trying to offload some of those more administrative tasks on because they suck my energy out. So on my list of energy vampires, anything administrative is an energy vampire for me. So I'm like, I want to get away from those so I can spend even more time being in front of people delivering these messages that I care so much about.
So Rachel, I understand you have something for our listeners today.
Yeah, so on my website, if you want to connect and learn more about this, I have different blog posts and other podcast episodes I've been on and more information about what I do and the kind of topics I cover. But if you go to unmutedlife.com, you can find a resilience resource guide will pop up. And so I've got a list of like my 10 to 12 strategies for boosting resilience. And they're very practical, actionable. And then I have like a reading list in there of some of my favorite books on those topics as well, and how to be more resilient. So that's a place where you can immediately get a freebie after listening to this.
And Rachel, can you share your social media for both yourself and your company so people can reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. That is my most active platform. So it's just Rachel Druckenmiller, D-R-U-C-K. I get the D-R-U-N-K a lot. But so LinkedIn is one. I'm on Instagram at Unmuted Life, and that's with an ED at the end, Unmuted Life. And then I'm on Facebook at Unmuted LLC. And I would give you my Twitter and other handles, but I don't really use Twitter. I'm at Unmuted Life on Twitter. If you're on Twitter, maybe you'll motivate me if you're listening to this to get more active on Twitter, but I'm at Unmuted Life on Twitter as well.
And for the listeners who have the links to her gift and her social media links in the show notes, you can find the show notes at www.cavnessexblog.com, and be sure to share this episode with everyone. Rachel, we're coming in with talk. Can you give us any advice or wisdom on any subject you want to talk about?
I feel like I've covered it. I feel like I've, I would say if I were to leave people with one thing to walk away from this with, it would be, one, to have a bit more grace and compassion for yourself. And then two, to have the courage to get curious about the things that you're doing well and the things you could be doing better or differently so that you can grow, and to be committed to that journey, not just at work, but also in your other relationships as well, because there's going to be crossover and there's going to be spillover benefits. So be willing to be curious, be courageous enough to be curious. And then based on the feedback that you get, I would say be willing to take action, be willing to take those courageous action steps, because confidence is the byproduct of action. And so, stop thinking about whatever you're thinking about and take action and go do something about it.
Rachel, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jason. It was a great conversation. We covered a lot.
And to our listeners, thank you for your time as well. And remember to be great every day. All right.